you ever feel down about yourself, like you could always be better? You could always look better, think better, perform better, work better. It seems to be endless. Maybe your desire to be better overshadows your ability to overcome adversarial situations, or maybe you're just pathetic. Either way, I often find myself contemplating the finer points of self-deprecating thoughts with a healthy dose of misanthropy. But that stems more from the fact that I'll never be half the man today's topic is. He's smart, sexy, well-spoken, and most importantly, an Olympic porcelain bowl filler. The god I'm expressing my fervorous adoration for is Pitch Erik. If you haven't compared yourself to Erik, a legendary staple of mankind and swamp creatures alike, then perhaps you haven't fully considered where you are in your puny little existence. Erik is somebody I've listened to for a very long time. I grew up listening to The Howard Stern Show because my mother's taste in entertainment is dubious at best, but I still love the show all the same, at least when it was good. Erik, nicknamed High Pitch, is easily one of the best longtime callers of the show, definitely one of the top 10 guests, and easily in the top prestige of the Wack Packers. In this video, I'm going to lay out some history for you, attempt to explain it to the best of my ability, and make you endure the same pain I did while researching this behemoth of a man. This is the story of a mentally handicapped man who writes bad checks, consumes entire buffet trays, gets paid to defecate, and most importantly, captures the hearts of millions of people with that irresistible voice of his. Erik Bleeman, known worldwide by his legendary nickname Pitch Erik, is a longtime guest of The Howard Stern Show, and of course he's a major player as far as the Wack Pack goes. He began gracing our world with his heavenly voice on the 16th of April 1971 in New York City, nestling in with the sewer rats in no time. He wasn't gonna go hungry. Thanks to the readily available food just strewn about the busy streets, Erik was fortunate enough to afford a diet that allowed him to carry around a massive hanging gut. As of his first appearance on The Stern Show, he claimed to be 275 pounds. This isn't too egregious as far as American obesity goes, as he's about 6 foot 1 inch in height. So, if he managed to diet properly, he could maintain a healthy weight while also enjoying himself. But that would take effort, and effort is a fleeting resource. Obviously, dieting hasn't worked all too well for him, as over the years he's essentially inflated. Comparatively, it seems like he might actually rival the size of a blimp in the coming years. His size could honestly be intimidating if it wasn't for his puny-sounding voice. Speaking of, we should probably discuss the genesis of his nickname. If somehow, some way, in some shape or form, you were unable to gather that his voice is high-pitched, you might need to turn back and reevaluate things. If you understand, then let's proceed.
You have sex with Al Goldstein?
No.
You're homo, aren't you?
No.
Yes, you are.
You're
No,
proud
I'm
homo.
not.
He's too ugly to be homo.
He suffers from a condition called puberphonia, which is also known as functional adolescent falsetto or pubescent falsetto. There are many possible causes for his ailment, but the science appears to be pretty up in the air. It has been deduced that it can have its roots both biologically and psychologically. The most common type of organic presentation of this is due to complications during that special time in everyone's life, whether it be an incomplete transformation of the larynx or slow development of puberty overall. As far as psychological causes, it could be caused by immense emotional stress, a resistance to pubertal development, self-consciousness, excessive maternal protection, etc., etc. This condition can also make one's voice sound a bit breathy or weak. In the case of Erik, not only does his voice sound pathetic, but he also has a lot of nasty mouth noises just getting thrown out of his maw whenever he speaks. Most of the time it sounds like there's a bit of spit or food just jumping around back and forth in there. I don't think I'd want him whispering any sweet nothings into my ears.
I like to go on the internet on the computer.
The computer.
Yeah.
Are you into? Well, okay. So basically, you've got all the porno sites, right? Am I right?
Kind of.
Okay.
Erik could have received a surgery that would have potentially corrected his voice. However, this procedure required that he be awake so they can check how he sounds. This scared him because living life while sounding like a mouse is easy compared to the one-time procedure. He was also concerned about pain, totally disregarding the fact that doctors tend to anesthetize patients. The scrub-wearing health technicians also told him there was a risk of blood clotting, therefore potentially killing him in the process. I get why he was scared of this, but with a voice like his, does he really have a lot of options? I would have bit the bullet and taken the plunge myself. His voice was unsurprisingly a large part of the discussion during his first appearance on The Howard Stern Show. The radio waves have never been the same since Erik relayed his vocal fry into a microphone on August 15, 1997. To give some background on this momentous event, prior to his first appearance, Erik had been trying to make contact with various Stern Show staffers in order to befriend them and potentially worm his way onto the show. This obviously worked quite well for him, because we're talking about him right now. He managed to stop Gary Dell'Abate, the producer of The Stern Show, and bothered him until he was able to get what he wanted. According to Gary's recollections, Erik dressed himself kinda poorly, looking a little frumpy, sporting Stern-branded clothing and a silly baseball cap. He waited outside for hours just so he could see Gary and strike up a conversation with him. Erik's general appearance had initially convinced Gary that Erik might be intellectually disabled, but Erik denied this. He also alleged Erik had sweaty hands. This would be a recurring issue for Erik that many people would inevitably comment on. What, you don't want to touch smelly, sweaty hands? Your loss. I don't exactly know what Erik had said to Gary, but I'm just gonna pretend they swapped some spit and that was the greasing Gary's palms actually needed. Well, that and Erik's hand sweat. When Erik arrived at the studio, people were impressed by his incredibly high voice, especially the star of the show, Howard Stern himself. Howard would proceed to question Erik about his condition and the effect it had on his unusual existence. Unsurprisingly, Erik's unique voice made it exponentially harder for him to court women. Howard remarked that Erik wasn't necessarily a bad-looking guy, it was just that his voice was so outwardly strange that women didn't want to get wrapped up in his bullshit. When further pressed about his romantic endeavors, Erik recalled a little experience he had when he was quite younger. Erik had met a girl at camp and they had a little summer love, but only after dating for a short bit, the stupid bitch broke things off with our high-pitched hero. While she allegedly didn't give him a reason as to why she couldn't stomach his presence any further, he claimed it was just his voice. But to be totally fair, this is a very realistic assumption. This had to be embarrassing, you know, talking about your lack of a sex life on the radio? But that's fine, because Erik was lucky enough to still have some hope. 2 people called into the show to offer their orifices for Erik's semen depositing. The first caller agreed to slide on his pole immediately, but it turned out to be someone putting on a semi-convincing feminine voice.
All right, here's a girl for you. You want to date this guy?
Yeah, I would go out with him.
Why?
Why not? Just to get him laid? I mean, I'm only 29,
This
actually.
is a guy.
What?
Dude.
See, I knew it.
I know. I was going to say, there's something wrong here.
The second caller, a wacko named Pippi, who referred to herself in the third person, said Erik sounded sweet and not dumb, but she was also unbelievably full of shit. This initial appearance only served to humiliate Erik, but that would be the norm for him going forward. During this interview, Gary brought up how Erik's dulcet tones likely did little favors for him when he used the phone, asking if people ever heard his voice after dialing his number and asking if they can speak to the man of the house. Erik did confirm that this had happened multiple times. I'd imagine it was an issue for the many years prior, and including the foreseeable future. That damn voice of his. I better control myself before my knees begin to buckle and I start leaking some intimate fluids. Excuse me, I need a tissue. His voice, despite being a major point of contention for him in his unusual life, has also helped him out a few ways professionally. You see, his outlandish speaking voice made him quite useful for prank calls. Being devoid of competent thought and being profoundly moronic are acceptable traits when it comes to making phony phone calls to people you don't even know. Some might argue it's actually a prerequisite. Either way, he lended his beautiful, magnificent voice for prank calls against the legendary Wack Packer Erik the Midget. I've also made a video on that Erik, so if you want to know more about him, be sure to check it out. Some of his best prank calls are ones that he didn't even make, as many of his quotes and quips from the show were later isolated by Sal Governal and Richard Christie, in order to be used for a soundboard specifically for phony calls. His voice was also used for what I have to assume is gay porn. Sure, it may sound fake, but it is fun to pretend that the human whale was getting his pooty hole taken to Pound Town, grinding away the edge of his tailbone. Have a listen.
Oh, yeah!
You like that, you pig whore?
Yes!
You want some spit in your face, you dirty piece of
Yes! Please spit in my face! Oh, yeah!
Look in the camera, whore.
Now, I've probably made more than 1 or 2 references regarding his lack of mental acuity already in this video, so allow me to explain why I see him as such an insipid, slack-jawed reject. He has always struggled with the finer points of human thought and calculation, such as education, logic, spoken words, and all of the other cornerstones of intelligence. To measure the extent of his mental capacity, he was evaluated and received some interesting results. The test stated that his spelling was roughly at an 8th grade level and his understanding of math was floating around a 6th grade level. He also revealed that he was in special education classes when he was in school. I mean this in the nicest possible way, but I doubt anybody is shocked by that. He also took a reading comprehension exam, which was performed with one half of the test being timed and the other not. His timed score was a 6.8 while his timed score was a 5.7. When he was asked what those numbers meant exactly, he said he didn't know. Go figure. I'm going to assume he passed them with flying colors. Additionally, the evaluation said that as far as work goes, he has good word recognition, his filing is good, and he can type a whopping 22 words per minute accurately. This evaluation really sounds like it covered every important facet of the human mental structure, doesn't it? We truly live in amazing times where we can calculate the mental capacity of someone who is undoubtedly the pinnacle of human intelligence. His intelligence is just one of those things that seems to fade in and out of efficiency. It's like he's trying to grab onto a thought, but the thought is greased up and slips right through his sweaty fingers. His mental acuity has made him a ripe target for entertainment through playful harassment. For example, he once received a call from KC, a member of the Stern Show staff who unfortunately got pretty close with Erik. KC was acting as if he was actually upset with High Pitch over a previous issue, and that he was prepared to cut High Pitch out of his life, which would harm his access to the show. However, High Pitch didn't want to lose two very important parts of his life, and he was willing to do anything to solve the problem. And I mean anything. He just wanted things to go back to normal. KC jokingly, and I stress jokingly, suggested that High Pitch give him some oral relief, and to nobody's surprise, Erik was down for it. But he's not gay though, just gotta make sure you understand that. He's not gay.
I think the only way to put this behind us, to kind of patch things up, is if you meet me at my apartment tonight, you suck my Have you seen my new apartment?
No, I haven't. And you're the only one that's going to be there, right?
I'm the only one. Yeah, just be me and you.
Yeah, why not?
And don't bullshit me. You said you'll do it.
Yeah.
Because if you don't do it, you'll never be on the show again.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll do it.
While we're on the topic of his brain, there's another weird quirk of his that has caused him much grief on the show. High Pitch Erik is one of the many people who are deathly afraid of fish. The technical term for his grievance is ichthyophobia, which is said to be an extreme phobia of fish. For someone his size, it seems a little weird that he would be frightened by something that typically is eaten by people his size, and because fish are completely harmless outside of water. When pressed about the genesis for his fear of sea creatures, he stated that his grandparents would take him on fishing trips and he couldn't stand looking at the fish because he was just scared of them. This, however, does not prevent him from eating them, of course, because fish is fucking yummy. He later contradicted his explanation, as he would attempt to suggest that his fear came from having a fish tank in his bedroom, where he had to look at dead fish instead of just removing them from the tank. The story just doesn't add up, but I gotta admit, I do enjoy when a narrative is left up for interpretation. In fact, his fear of fish spawned one of his greatest in-person appearances on The Stern Show. Erik had been kicked off of the show many times for a variety of reasons. One particularly fascinating example is when he told Howard he wanted to participate in the Wheel of Fish bit that was happening on the show, but then he backed out. Howard was understandably annoyed by this as he and his team had already acquired the fish necessary for the bit. Because Erik pussied out, Stern decided that he was not allowed back on the show unless Erik wore fish mittens, which are dead fish that have been cut in a way that allows them to be worn as a glove, more or less. Erik did inevitably wear the meaty gloves after several minutes of deliberating and shoddily bargaining with Stern. Upon completion of this tumultuous task, the show received a call from Wendy the Slow Adult, who told Erik he was a chicken and she wasn't scared of fish. Personally, I am very proud of her for that.
Get it in there so it stands there. No, it's not. Get it in on its own. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You did it. You faced your fears.
Moving along, if you couldn't tell by just looking at him, High Pitch isn't exactly a spokesperson for a healthy lifestyle. His weight is arguably a bigger problem for him than just his funny-sounding voice. He was once asked what he ate in a day and what sort of exercise he did, if any. He confirmed that he did do some exercise by walking for upwards of 45 minutes a day and then stated he eats whatever he wants. Pretty solid diet plan, all things considered. What could possibly go wrong? In this very same interview, he was asked what his favorite fast food chain is and what his go-to order consisted of. He answered boldly with his chest out, stating Taco Bell, and his order was at least 7 burritos every single time. Where in the hell does he find the space in his gut for 7 burritos? Come to think about it, his diet undoubtedly affects his health and probably makes using the bathroom quite the task. The amount he craps is probably a topic of its own, but do I really want to spend several minutes talking about his feces? Perhaps we'll have a better understanding of his body's functioning once we cover the Craptacular Saga, but I'm getting ahead of myself again. Take a wild guess how much food this guy is able to shove down his gullet. The correct answer would be that it's incalculable, but just saying too goddamn much is also an acceptable answer. This guy just fucking loves food. For example, Erik once recounted a visit to IHOP he had one Black Friday some time ago. Apparently, there was a line that went straight out of the front door, and Erik, being the hungry behemoth that he always is, stuck around to pack in mostly edible slop into his belly. Immediately upon sitting down and testing the structural integrity of his chair via placing his gargantuan ass upon it, Erik ordered a helping of all-you-can-eat pancakes. This meal entailed 12 butter pecan pancakes with whipped cream, extra sausages, a bacon and cheese omelet with a side of even more sausages. Altogether, that was roughly about 2 plates of just sausages alone. Toast with extra butter and 8 packs of sugar in his coffee per cup, alongside loading them up with half and half. If nothing else, Erik being alive is just a colorful demonstration of the amount of abuse the human body can actually handle. While it is impressive, it is also quite horrifying. Perhaps of less significance, but also very disgusting in its own right, Erik has this weird thing where his gums just bleed. He'll be smiling like a goof, sporting a shit-eating grin while his teeth glisten from them being lathered up in a mixture of blood and his own saliva. All things considered, I find it really fascinating that women aren't just throwing themselves at him, you know? He's clearly such an unstoppable babe magnet with plenty to offer. I don't know, maybe I'm being a little too harsh on the guy. He has had a pretty hard life, and he has an unstable relationship with food on top of it. It has to be difficult to live like that. But do you know what else he has an unstable relationship with? That's right, literally anybody and everybody. Erik has experienced a variety of different relationship dynamics with many people, ranging from his family to people who work on the show and people who orbit Stern's productions. Many of these people can't stand to be around him because he's gross and obnoxious. One of the most unfortunate of these relationships was the rocky one he had with his own mother. When his mother passed away, Erik got the shocking news that he was written out of her will, and as such would inherit nothing from her estate. The executor of her estate, which was Erik's brother-in-law, found him squatting in his late mother's apartment, wherein he kicked him out right before a really harsh snowstorm. But that's okay, because Erik's blubber shielded his squishy insides from the harsh conditions. High-Pitch declared that he would contest his dead mother's wishes in court. What a lovely son, not respecting the wishes of his now-deceased mom.
Gary's point is, you're saying your sister had you sign a piece of paper saying you could not contest the will, and you're claiming you're too stupid to understand what you signed, right?
I didn't. She didn't tell me what I was signing. I was directed to sign on another piece of paper.
His sister allegedly made him sign a piece of paper that stated that he agreed he would not contest the will. Smart move on his part, right? He signed it without reading anything on the document, later arguing that he is too incompetent to know what he signed. He actually stupidly admitted on the radio that he signed a document without reading it, which of course means his arguments would not hold up in court if he were to try and get his way. Somewhat related because we're talking about his folks, when Erik's sister was getting married, she barred Erik from the wedding unless he stayed off the show for 6 months. He didn't listen and she let him attend anyway. But let's move forward, shall we? Because he's such a staple of the Wack Pack, he of course has had many interactions with other Wack Packers. One especially noteworthy example is Erik's vitriolic view of Elegant Elliot Offen, who is somebody I should probably cover at some point in the future. Back in 2002, Stern was arranging a celebrity boxing match, and of course he was intending to make it a grand show with his Wack Packers and unusual frequent guests. Elliot wanted to get in the ring with High-Pitch, and High-Pitch, being the Chad that he is, accepted the offer. He enlisted the help of a personal trainer to help him get primed for the big match. The following day, Howard got both Erik and Elliot on the line. It went about as well as you would expect for a debate between a high-pitched individual with a wet brain and a loud schizophrenic shyster. Elliot alleged that Erik had once said many unkind things to him. I can't imagine what a New Yorker in 2002 would possibly say about a man running several miles in high heels every day. I'm sure it was something very supportive and understanding. Erik, however, pushed back, stating that he had 7 trainers, which is way more than Elliot had. Ultimately, nothing would come from this little verbal skirmish, but it's worth mentioning nonetheless. Despite the varying responses he received when attempting to socialize with people, it isn't hard to gather that maybe people are a touch harsh to him. Sure, there's a variety of reasons why people aren't nice to him, alongside it just being part of his shtick, you know, being weird and annoying, but maybe he's misunderstood. Maybe by the end of this video we'll have a newfound understanding for Erik, or maybe not. Probably not. The negative interactions have ultimately piled up and made him feel out of touch, and dare I say lonely. High-Pitch has largely kept to himself and definitely wants to be with a woman. Howard, being the kind and non-judgmental person that he is, pulled plenty of strings to make something happen. High-Pitch told Howard that if he knew any women that needed a friend, to put in a good word for him. This happened once, and it was quite the spectacle. Some time ago, a young woman named Sunny managed to find her way onto the studio floor, in which Howard interviewed her about her life. She wasn't quite like most women that he'd interviewed before, so she wasn't a porno star and wasn't coming on to compete in a contest that required her knockers to be out. She was homeless and suffered from some kind of obvious mental illness, definitely some kind of form of psychosis. Either way, she provided plenty of entertaining fodder for radio, and she was promptly interviewed about various factors of her life, like what her bathing routine was, how she got around, what she was interested in, the whole 9 yards. She mentioned that she wanted to get to know somebody to talk to and explore the world with, you know? Something non-romantic. Howard pondered this, racking around the idea in his think meat, and it occurred to him. He knew just to pair her up with. He instructed her to return to the studio the next morning for a follow-up interview, as he was going to fulfill her request. She returned the next day, energized and ready to mingle. When Howard began his preamble for Erik's introduction, she mentioned that she didn't want love, but instead a friend, and then almost immediately wanted people to call into the show to ask her questions about her opinions on foreign politics and all of the other fun, serious topics that people want to dwell on. Instead of allowing this, Howard made the wise decision to usher in High Pitch, which she was quite shocked by. Turns out she magically had conditions for friendship when she saw, heard, and of course smelled Erik. Poor guy.
High Pitch, you've said to me many times, you're a lonely guy.
Yeah.
You want a friend.
Yeah.
He'll be anybody's
Yeah,
friend.
you've asked me to be your friend.
I have conditions. I have conditions of friendship.
All of a sudden she looked at High Pitch.
Howard pushed them to chat a bit just to see if there was any kind of real connection. To nobody's surprise, as history has a fascinating tendency to repeat itself, Erik dropped the ball. They had no chemistry, Erik didn't know how to talk to the poor girl, instead starting his attempts to court her by asking her where she lived. Totally not creepy, let alone inappropriate given the fact that she's, homeless. He was trying to ask her out right away and she wasn't having any of it. Not to mention he would immediately start asking sexual questions after Howard steered the conversation a certain way. By the end of it, she had nothing to do with him, not like we didn't expect much else. Regardless of how poorly he marketed himself to a transient, Erik did convince a woman to sleep with him at least once, with the two eventually becoming an item of sorts for a brief period. He ruined this in his typical backwards fashion. Angel, the woman who agreed to receive his penis, was going through a pretty rough patch in her life, especially considering that she was just diagnosed with cancer. He called her 27 times while she was at work, which understandably convinced her to tell him to stay away. But she wouldn't be the last person to experience Erik in a more intimate manner. Unfortunately for them, plenty of women have had the displeasure of being around High Pitch when his penis is exposed. Somehow, fellow Wack Packer Hank the Angry Drunken Dwarf and High Pitch were in the same room, naked, with a bunch of other naked men, because there were a few women paid to be present under the pretense that they would polish some hard poles. It was a good old-fashioned orgy, which is not uncommon for those who work in the entertainment industry, so Erik should have considered himself a very lucky man that he had the privilege of participating in such an important event. Hank munched on some carpet while Erik had difficulties achieving and maintaining a steady stiffy. That's okay though, because one of the girls talked dirty to him, which helped raise him up from a few centimeters to a couple inches, which for him was quite the miraculous growth. Erik was involved in this sexual adventure for about an hour and 15 minutes, leaving without climaxing. Obviously, it was a very productive hour and time was efficiently spent. It should be extremely obvious by now, but Erik has very little experience with women outside of the use of manipulation or overtly self-damaging tactics. His lack of intimate interaction appears to have stunted his ability to converse with the ladies, but overall he really does just come off as a creep. Sure, his voice isn't doing him any favors, but women will put up with a lot of shit. You'd be shocked how much, but definitely nowhere near as much shit as he has to offer. Jessica Hahn, who had appeared on the show multiple times, was grieving over the death of her lover who had recently passed away. Understandably, the passing of her longtime lover dealt a tremendous amount of emotional pain on her. For context, she had been with her man for 16 years, so the emotional wound was understandably very deep. Erik learned of this, calling into the show to tell Howard that he'd like to help her however he could. This was nothing more than a bid for her affection, or maybe just her cooch, because he admitted he wanted to perform some kind of dating game with her on the show, totally disregarding the fact that she was trying to mend her broken heart. In this same call, which I'm sure he was hoping Jessica was listening to, he told Howard to check Erik's live broadcast. Once Stern and his co-host feasted their eyes upon the internet feed, Howard instructed High Pitch to put his foot into his mouth, which of course Erik responded that he wouldn't be able to do, but he tried anyway. Once his stopper was visible on camera, Howard remarked that one of Erik's toes appeared to have the nail peeling back or falling off. This toenail was also visibly green. It was revealed that Erik suffered from gout, but he claimed that the discolored shielding of one of his pedal phalanges was unrelated, instead admitting it's because he fails to properly clean his feet. This was definitely some kind of fungal infection. He would later admit to seeing a podiatrist at least once a week so they could clip his toenails because anytime he'd do it, he'd somehow screw it up and get them infected. He could only do this because he was receiving free healthcare assistance. Prior to this, he'd have one of his male friends cut his toenails for him. This might have been a funny fib for the air, but I'm just gonna pretend it's all real. While you may be thinking this disgusting toe shit is indeed gross but unrelated to the happenings of Jessica, remember he was trying to put his fungal foot in the door to plow her this very same call. So even if she was listening, she would undoubtedly be repulsed by his lack of hygiene. I think we all need a high-pitch Erik in our lives. Sure, he might be a little creepy and maybe he emits a troubling aura, but overall I feel he offers such a wonderful dynamic that could really shape up your day-to-day routine. I'd say he's quite the friendly guy, especially if you're a woman or an officer of the NYPD. Now why am I bringing up New York City's finest? Everyone's favorite boys in blue. You see, Erik, being a pillar of the community, would often invite officers from his neighborhood into his home to drink wine. That is a totally normal request in my opinion, and I've shared plenty of stiff drinks with officers in the evening, shortly before they go home to commit domestic violence. Erik just couldn't manage to lure any woman into his place, probably for pretty obvious reasons, but he damn sure could get officers in there without having to make an emergency phone call. He would just walk up to them, strike up a very uncomfortable and forced conversation, then bluntly invite them over to his pad. Most of these officers were men, and he brought them back to drink wine. Do you get what I'm starting to imply here? Hold your horses though, he's not gay. He's just, hospitable. The maximum number of cops to be at his house without being there to detain him was capped somewhere around 3 or 4, which is quite strange given that he's a bit of a public nuisance and they're supposed to be protectors of the community. This all sounds like corruption to me, as they're breaking bread with a menace to society. The more you dig into this, the deeper it goes. High-pitch claimed the cops always call him to see how he's doing. I kind of hope they somehow managed to call him from the emergency line. Come to think of it, I wonder if these alleged calls count as wellness checks. He really loves the NYPD. He once owned a police scanner to listen to radio chatter. He claimed to listen to the Stern Show on his radio while simultaneously listening to the police scanner to maximize his media consumption. If he heard something was happening near his hovel, he'd roll himself down the stairs and get stuck halfway through the front door just to see what was up. Erik's presence was obviously a valuable resource to the police due to his immense expertise in criminology. Like this one time he heard about somebody having jumped off a nearby building, so he sparingly lubed up his luscious body and squeezed through the front door with minimal effort, primarily due to the fact the door frame was already previously destroyed by his thunderous hammies. He claimed that he saw the body and the mess was just all over the place. Gotta love the totally normal reaction to death, looking at it. If he doesn't have some kind of badged company, Erik finds himself spending his free time alone. He just sits on his fucking ass and does nothing all day. Work is not an issue at this point in his life because he was living off of unemployment, and stupidly told all of the show's millions of listeners about his choice just to be lazy. But what can I say? I'm jealous. I wish my life was half as easy. In the same interview where he divulged about the cops, he also stated that he knows people who work for news stations, and that he personally knew Chuck Scarborough. They did not have sex because Erik is not gay. Don't you forget it. Erik's extreme friendliness seems to be a recrudescent problem for him. As such, he tends to assume that he is on better terms with people than he actually is. This is pretty jarring considering that historically many people have always treated him poorly or at least told him that he's off-putting. Maybe that's an understatement because I've also heard people comment on his intelligence, his weight, his body odor, etc, etc. Either way, people haven't always been nice to him, but he tries nonetheless. For example, in 2020, while everybody was still boarded up in their homes, the Stern Show obviously had to operate remotely. This of course meant that Howard's staff would have to connect to him and whoever else to produce the show. This also meant that the staff members had to work while also managing their families at the same time. Erik, being the sweetheart that he is, offered to head over to Shuli's house, one of Stern's staffers obviously, to help him with the kids. While there is nothing obviously indicating that he can't be trusted around kids, he is still someone I wouldn't put in charge of people that can't even actually make their own major decisions yet. Most people in his position wouldn't offer such a thing because it's highly inappropriate. Erik's offer was turned down for obvious reasons. His overall demeanor and inability to grasp the etiquette of socialization is just one of the many reasons why he's a big part of the Wack Pack. Speaking of that stellar group, Erik of course has had plenty of interactions with other Wack Packers. When he finally met Crazy Alice in person at the studio, the two were very affectionate, with lots of hugging and friendly holding. Alice stated that she didn't like Erik in a sexual way, which meant High Pitch was unfortunately being denied coochie yet again. God damn it. He claimed he hated Erik the Midget because he thought he was cooler than he really was or something like that. Their mutual hatred for each other never really seemed to be elaborated on in any meaningful way. I have to assume it's because they both believe there could only be one Erik on the show. I'm personally of the belief that it's a shame that the two never became a buddy cop duo. I know, 2 Eriks in one video, bear with me here. Pitch Erik and the other Erik, the wheelchair-bound club-fucking-footed midget one, used to bump heads on the air quite a bit. I say used to because the little one went the way of the dodo and fucking died. Prior to his death, however, like I stated earlier in the video, the tater tot was on the receiving end of prank calls orchestrated by Pitch. Unfortunately for our favorite pint-sized actor, Pitch wanted to make Howard laugh and to entertain the show's audience, and Erik the midget could not stop himself from answering the phone. Pitch's primary shtick was putting on a somewhat feminine voice, which came very naturally to him, and claiming to be Kelly Clarkson. The wheelchair rodent was never impressed by this, consistently let down that Kelly would say so many unkind things to him. What's even more shocking is sometimes he couldn't actually tell that it wasn't Pitch right away,
Despite the fact Kelly sounded like this.
When the little guy made an in-person appearance on the show, Pitch made sure to stop by and dress as Kelly to potentially seduce Erik the shitcock. These attempts were unsuccessful. Pitch's desire to keep his infamous relevance was critical to his survival, or so he thought, and that he was going to need to be the driving force behind his persistence and participation of games and events on the show. Well, that and money, we all bow to the almighty dollar. Pitch Erik has participated in a variety of contests and games on the Stern Show, one of the most notable being the Tough Enough contest. This event required selected participants to be handcuffed to particularly gross or obnoxious Wack Packers for an allotted amount of time for a set slump of cash. This time, Pitch was the stinky person who had been paired with a normal woman, which surely couldn't be a recipe for disaster. The woman would win a whopping $20,000 if she survived 1 week handcuffed to Erik. Well, if you want to get technical, it was only 4 days, but that's close enough to 7. And above all, she would have to accompany him on his awful, idiotic escapades. It's also worth noting that all potential contestants were selected for the opportunity to play because they were all desperately in need of money. When introducing Erik to everyone, Stern described him as smelly, obnoxious, moronic, he will drive you crazy, he talks incessantly, and his mouth smells, which is honestly about the most accurate description he will ever be given. He was also called the world's most annoying human being, which is also not an understatement. Before anybody was allowed to consent in participating in the contest, Howard instructed them to get a whiff of Erik's musk. It was undoubtedly foul, probably a mix of onions and wet dog turds. Pitch was very excited for this contest, having a full action-packed week already planned, including getting drunk with his belligerent friends, going to a Chinese buffet, and taking a pungent Chinese buffet shit shortly after, and of course watching pornography on his laptop in his dingy apartment. A winner, or rather loser, was picked, a sweet girl named Terry who was in a bit of a financial pickle, having spent the last of her money getting on the show. Unfortunately for her, she didn't last very long. Her first big issue after being shackled to the creature from the depths of the Hudson River was that she wanted her plane ticket reimbursed, which really didn't make a whole lot of sense on her part as she was on the right track to earn $20,000. After she attempted to bargain to get some of her cash back, Pitch had to get back to his apartment so they could begin their bonding experience. The quickest route to his palace required a brief ride on a subway train, which is something she had never been on before and contested because she was claustrophobic. Which is fair, since Erik would take up half the space and weight capacity of one single subway train car. Terry also had to use the bathroom, but she was too nervous to go around Erik. While they didn't appear to be handcuffed while she was in the bathroom stall for obvious reasons, he did have to stay by the door while facing away. She wanted him to walk over or stretch and reach the faucet so he could turn on some water for her to assist her in peeing, but Erik refused because he wasn't supposed to leave his post. Upon arriving at Pitch's dungeon of love, she was repulsed by the striking scent of doo-doo coming from his fuck lair. The final straw that broke the camel's over-encumbered back was when he started to look at adult media on his laptop, and of course she had to sit right there next to him and couldn't do anything about it. I can't blame her for backing out at this point because that is fucking disgusting. Anyway, moving along, another stellar excerpt from Pitch's history is the Craptacular Saga. Oh yes, we finally got to this one. This was a short-lived but semi-recurring thing on the show. The concept was simple. 2 lardasses had to take shits and weigh them. I'm not even joking. The event would feature Erik and Joey Boots, another frequent guest on the Stern Show. Joey was also known for popularizing the act of buoy bombing news reporters when they were out on the streets. If you don't know what that is, just look it up for yourself. Anyway, the saga started out strong with the duo calling in and stating that they needed money to start filling up on food, which is within reason considering it'd be a business expense for something that'd be on the air. I do find it humorous to imagine somebody having to write off the spending while doing their taxes because the money spent was used to make people poop, which was part of the business. Howard, however, was not keen on just giving them money to gorge themselves so they take horse-sized shits, because of course that'll be the outcome if they fill their guts with tons of junk food. Regardless, they spent some time before the shitting race just eating at their usual rate, which is, a lot. Erik respectively had short ribs, 30 pieces of unspecified sushi, coconut shrimp, oysters and black bean sauce, and who knows really what else. The disgusting slop he slowly pushed down his gullet undoubtedly stewed in his gut, turning into a disgusting brown mass just waiting to be released on the unsuspecting world. On the day of the event, various staffers put money on who they thought would win. Before everything commenced, Joey weighed about 315 pounds while Erik weighed a whopping 347 pounds. Both men are clearly prime examples of the American condition. A month prior to this, Erik weighed 333 pounds, so he managed to gain 14 fucking pounds in one single month. That is honestly incredible. The contest officially started at 6 in the morning. Erik and Joey used modified toilets that allowed the poo to be monitored. Erik made the first bowel movement by dropping 3 ounces into the bowl. After much time and pushing, the event ended with the two having released the same amount of duty from their asses, both amounting to 12 ounces. High Pitch, however, had diarrhea, and some Redditors to this day think that counting the diarrhea was unfair, as it was just water weight. Leave it to Reddit to argue the semantics about the sludge that gets released from people's pooty holes. Adding onto the list, another great example was when Erik participated as a helping hand during a round of Wheel of Sex. The game was simple. It was just him and an oiled-up fella by the name of Gay Ramon. What his orientation actually is might be too difficult to figure out. A fellow Wack Packer, Elephant Boy, stopped by the studio to pay his respects to the dawn of entertainment radio and finally spin the wheel. Elephant Boy's true motive for appearing was that he wanted an Xbox to share with his girlfriend's kids, and he was willing to do whatever it took to get his hands on one, as long as that didn't involve getting a normal job. He was tasked with spinning the wheel, which could land on a variety of different outcomes, including but not limited to peeing in a diaper, shaving his own head, getting teabagged by High Pitch Erik, playing naked leapfrog with High Pitch, painting High Pitch's package green with his hand. Elephant Boy inevitably landed on painting Erik's junk. Outcomes like this are why I'm not much of a gambling man myself. High Pitch immediately dropped his thong down to his ankles when instructed to by Howard. In doing so, everyone in the studio learned that Erik is uncircumcised, despite being from a Jewish background. Howard inquired about this, but Erik really didn't know if he was actually circumcised or not, as he didn't fully understand what circumcision actually is. People on the show remarked that it looked like part of his penis was missing. Whether or not he has a deformed dick, or if it's just really short, probably isn't a mystery. But I'm also not going to go searching for footage of Erik's tallywhacker. Elephant Boy placed his trembling fingers against Erik's meat, gently but nervously caressing his doodads while coating them in paint. Erik was fine with the whole ordeal, as he claimed he wanted to help Elephant Boy get the Xbox he wanted. But Erik's not gay though. It'd only be gay if a PlayStation was involved rather than an Xbox. Hell, Erik was given the opportunity to get an Xbox as well, but this would have required him to stick a fish down his pants. Not exactly worth it in my opinion, but then again, video games are pretty cool. Before we move away from Erik's questionable sexuality, I think it's worth mentioning an event from his youth that he confessed to during a Wack Pack Revelations bit. Apparently, when Erik was hanging out with one of his buddies, they were drinking and his friend just happened to grab High Pitch's penis, measured it, and then kissed him. Erik reciprocated by measuring his friend's penis as well. But remember, High Pitch Erik is not gay. Moving on, it would appear that High Pitch is seemingly unemployable, as he's got a long list of jobs that he's either quit or gotten fired from. He previously had a job at an airport where all he did was move people's luggage. He just had to call the show and let everyone know that he was finally shaping up. This seems like it'd be a simple job that he just couldn't possibly find a way to screw up, right? I mean, it is a good thing that the place bit the bullet and brought him on, because it had been a whole 2 years since he had last had employment, with his previous job being at the post office sorting mail. The only reason Erik busted his hump to get this job was because Howard instructed him to. At the very least, he was learning to keep his distance from the doors of the building where the show was being recorded, instead of spending all of his free time during the day loitering in hopes of interacting with people that are far more notorious than him for arguably better reasons. In the same call where he was boasting about his job, High Pitch Erik brought up that his father told him to stop being a bum and get himself out there in the workforce. If your father telling you to stop being a lazy schlub doesn't motivate you, I have no idea how some radio personality would have that kind of power over you instead. I'd say it illustrates his rather unusual attachment to the show, prioritizing a rich man's opinions over the concerns of his own blood. He also bragged that he was earning $6.50 an hour, plus tips, and the paycheck arrived every other Friday. What a monstrous win. Totally worth bragging about. Erik also tried his own online streaming service of sorts. At one point, he was having some issues with the Johnny Fratto Social Club, an online platform owned by Johnny Fratto, which also happened to house the musings of Erik the Midget. High Pitch had a short-lived music-centric show on the site. Angered by how the staff and users on the site were treating him, Erik set out to create his own online streaming service called High Pitch Social Circle. His shows were quite the boring thing. He mostly sat shirtless in front of his webcam doing absolutely fuck all. People would go out of their way to say nasty things to him in his stream chats. They'd call him dumb, fat, ugly, the usual stuff. Seems like things still ring true with behavior on the internet today, huh? Anyway, Erik lost his job and began treating his streams as his new profession because he's a hard worker. When pressed about this, he actually denied ever being fired. This also mainly served as a means for him to try to talk to women who merely just wanted attention. He was taking whatever he could get his grubby little fingers on. Unsurprisingly, this all fell apart much faster than it came together. Despite calling into the show and being about as well known as he was before, Erik seems to still struggle with relevance to this very day. He started a handful of YouTube channels that have gone entirely defunct for unknown reasons, be it from a lack of funding or him possibly having forgotten the login credentials. He often starts a live stream and pulls a king cobra by immediately telling people to give him money, but he somehow finds a way to be so fucking infuriatingly persistent with his demands for cash that his streams become unwatchable. Well, that and of course his voice can be a bit much after hearing it uninterrupted for about 20 seconds or so, but I digress. Continuing forward, Erik's mental capacity and overall health seem to be a fluctuating factor in his life. On some days, he appears to be a bumbling idiot. Others, he comes off like a conniving jackass. Hell, he's written bad checks that he knew he wouldn't be able to pay for, so perhaps he isn't as dumb as he is crooked. In fact, regarding his overall intelligence, Erik actually received an IQ test and received a 66. That puts him pretty low all things considered, which would explain some of his decision making. His criminal nature must come and go as the wind blows, just like his mental capacity. His fluctuating percipience does tend to work against him. Another especially shocking example was when Joey Boots approached Erik and informed him that they both now dislike Mike Ganji, who was another person who worked with Stern, because he happened to go somewhere that they didn't like. Some other station or restaurant or gay bathhouse or something like that. Regardless, Joey said that they needed to defend Howard's honor, and in order to do this, Joey was going to need Erik's help. Joey's ideas were simple and down to earth. He wanted Erik to mail Mike some marijuana. The reason for this is that the show was allegedly looking to fire Mike, and if they actually fired him, they would owe him a good chunk of severance money. There are clauses that can actually allow the company to avoid paying severance if a certain criteria is met, such as getting arrested for a harsh crime. Erik was absolutely down to mail somebody some grass. Then he'd have to talk to the postmaster to tip them off about Mike supposedly receiving drugs in the mail every week. The other idea was somehow even more outlandish. Joey proposed the idea of running Mike over with a car or snuffing him out with bats. Erik was surprisingly 100% behind this. Not only was he agreeing to potentially commit crimes, he did it over the phone. Christ, this guy is dumb.
So what about if we, I don't know, maybe to wait on the street and maybe run him down with a car or beat him up with bats? We can wear masks.
You and I snuff him out? To snuff Ganji out?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you do it, though?
Me and you, yeah.
No, I'm serious, though. Would you do it? Because, you know, you're laughing. I don't know if you're taking that seriously.
Well, Ganji's messing around with the wrong people now.
Well, exactly. And he's a traitor to the show.
Yeah, Ganji. Ganji's history, that piece of full old fat.
Another interesting point from recent years is that he only got his driver's license just a few short years ago. His current age as of making this video is 52, and he got his license in 2019. He was about 48 years old, more than half of his life already gone, before he was legally able to operate a vehicle on the open road. This only goes to show how the bar to pass a driver's test is way too low in America. Not too long after getting his license, he was bragging about how he received 9 different documents in the mail with unique traffic light photos of him. He was seriously bragging about getting caught committing traffic violations. What a bad boy. Another wonderful thing that happened not long after receiving his license is how he managed to have 2 vehicular accidents in one single day. Not to mention how he shared stories of having road rage on the air. Would you feel safe sharing the road with this guy? This concerns me and makes me beg the question that when he does crash, it's not an if but a when. Will his body weight make the crash even more catastrophic? I'd rather not find out through experience. Overall, when everything is said and done, Pitch Erik is quite possibly one of the most unusual people to grace the airwaves. While he may not have had an exciting life with various cinematic twists and turns, he did manage to carve out a nice little piece of business for himself, at the expense of mooching off of everyone around him. But the finer details aren't really all that important. Pitch, despite what people may say about him, is an endlessly entertaining person with a big heart and an even bigger gut. If you're a woman looking to cuddle up with a big stinky man, or a mush-mouthed guy who just wants an Xbox, Erik has got you covered. While yes, Stern has had other guests that are arguably more entertaining and quote-worthy when compared to Erik, such as Beetlejuice, but High Pitch Erik is still a major part of the Wack Pack's illustrious history. My hope is that after this video, maybe you'll want to learn more about High Pitch's story or something that happened on the show and you'll take a listen for yourself. Stern's newer stuff is admittedly pretty awful, but the early days at Sirius and the old days on terrestrial radio were truly something else. I enjoyed the show a fair bit, and maybe you will too. High Pitch Erik is definitely worth the investment of your time, I promise. But that's going to be it for today's video. If you like what I do, leave a comment, rate, and subscribe. If you want to support me in a more personal way, you can check out the Patreon link and the Teespring link in the description. I've got more content coming down the pipeline. But until then, I'll see you degenerates next time.